So we are reading Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. We are on chapter 8, page number 64 of the book. And page number
87 of the PDF. As a baby fixes his attention on an object in the physical plane, the aura tenses and brightens, especially around the head. Then, as his attention fades, the aura fades in color. However, it retains some of the experience in the form of color in the aura. Each experience adds a little color to the aura and enhances its individuality. Thus, the work of aura building is also going on and continues in this way throughout life. One's life experiences can be found there.
So this is very important, right? The aura represents us at that moment in time. So whenever we used to take the aura photograph with the Progen camera also, depending on where the colors were and what the shades of the colors were, what was the symbolism that was showing up in the aura picture, we could discern a lot of stuff about the person, and also the aura acted like a mirror. It showed the person who and what he or she was at that point in time. So over here, what she's saying is that as the normally what we used to find that small babies and young children generally had red auras, right? Bright red auras, right? Because they are more grounded in physicality. But as you grow ahead, other colors start coming into your auric field and you build your personality. Your personality is represented by your auric field, right? So this is what she's saying, that as you have life experiences, it gets registered in the aura. We are also finding this in biofield tuning, where your life experiences are all there in the biofield. The biofield is another name for the aura, right? So everything is recorded in the auric field. Whatever you are is recorded there. Now, if someone is able to perceive the aura, right, and has a way of discerning what the auric field is showing, the person can know everything about the other person. Literally speaking, nothing is hidden.
After birth, there remains a strong energy connection between the mother and child. This connection is sometimes referred to as the germ plasma. It is strongest between mother and child at birth and will remain there throughout life, although it will not be so pronounced. This psychic umbilicus is the connection through which children remain in contact with their parents over the years. Many times, one is a of traumatic experiences the other is having, although there may be great distance between them on the physical level.
So again, there is always a connection maintained between the father, the mother, and the child. Okay. There is a psychic connection which is maintained. It is maintained through these cords of light which actually go. What I have also perceived, and it's there in one of the pictures in the book also, when two lovers are standing, there are connections made between the in various levels of the couple, right? If the connections are not there, I have found that the couple is not going to stay together. And literally speaking, according to me, we make these connections with everyone that we connect with. But the connection with the parents is most pronounced. It is most available, and especially with the mother, right? That is how many mothers get to know their child is in trouble, even if the child is on the other side of the world. The psychic connection technically remains. But yeah, it also depends on how close the mother and the child relationship, they keep the relationship, how they maintain that relationship. That also becomes very important.
The field of the child is entirely open and vulnerable to the atmosphere in which he lives. Whether things are in the open or not, the child senses what is going on between his parents.
So this is what we call epigenetics. One is what happens with the DNA, the genetic, but the DNA, the genetic codes are activated because of epigenetics. So what is happening in the environment of the child will activate the genes which are required to be working, right? So epigenetics becomes very important, and the child perceives everything. The parents may not realize it, but everything is perceived by the child. How they are interacting, whether they love each other or not, they care with each other or not, they're fighting, what is happening in the environment, it's all registered in the field of the child.
The child constantly reacts to his energetic environment in a manner consistent with his temperament. He may have vague fears, fantasies, tantrums, or illness. The child's chakras are all open in the sense that there is no protective film over them, which screens out the incoming psychic influences. This makes the child very vulnerable and impressionable.
Okay, so just going forward, we'll see a picture, but the chakras are, there is a central cord, and then the chakras are connected to that central cord. And the chakras have various chakras within it. They have smaller chakras, right? And above these smaller chakras, there's like a film which actually protects or sieves what is coming into the chakra. But the child's chakras, they don't have that film. So the child is very open, very vulnerable. It's like a whiteboard, right? Nothing is written on the board. So whatever impression comes on the board will start to affect the child. There is no protective casing there. That's why it's very important to allow the child to experience only uplifting and positive things, which will benefit the child as the child is growing up, right? If the child is exposed to traumatic situations and a lot of adverse energy fields, then the child's system will register that as normal, and then it will create problems as the child grows up.
Thus, even though the chakras are not developed like those of an adult, and the energy that is experienced in a vague way, it still goes right into the field of the child, and the child must deal with it in some way. See figure 8 to compare adult and child chakra.
We'll just be doing it.
At around the age of 7, a protective screen is formed over the chakra openings that filters out a lot of the incoming influences from the universal energy field. Thus, the child is no longer as vulnerable as before. This stage can be seen as a child grows and it is near the time of dawning of reason.
So this is the reason that film gets formed at the age of 7. So that's why they say your formative years are from the age of 1 to 6. Now, of course, it can be a little few months here and there. So whatever the child is influenced or experiences from the age of 1 to 7 gets ingrained into the child, because the child has no filtering process. There is no filter which allows the child to discern what it's experiencing and what it's not. Everything gets imprinted, right? So that's why the first few years of a child's growing up, the age of 1 to 6, that is when the child learns the most. And we have to be very careful with what we are exposing the child to at that age. Yes, Renuji?
भैया, that means that's why little children वो जो हम कहते हैं नजर लग जाती है, is it because of this protective thing not being there?
Correct, absolutely, because they're totally vulnerable. They are open to receiving anything that is there, right? That's why it's very important to expose the child only to uplifting stuff. And the more the child is exposed to that, it can integrate into its system. Later on, it will always play a very good part. This is something that we talked about in the magical child also, the matrix system,
Okay.
right? The first few years are very important for the child's upbringing. And at that point, the child is also very connected with the mother. So whatever the mother and the father are doing totally influences the child. So that's why the parents have to be very careful as to what are they exposing the child to. And the child's field is very, very sensitive. So you can't hide stuff from the child. If you think you can hide stuff, it's a fallacy in my view.
And Bhaiya, what exactly was that genetic and the thing?
So genetics is what is there in your DNA.
Yeah. But
What
how
is
is
coming
that
down from
affected
your
by
ancestors, right?
Right.
But
So,
in the genetic code, what happens is all the codes need not be activated. This epigenetics, I think, was coined by Bruce Lipton, where he said that your environment is what triggers the genes which will get activated in your system. So that's why your environment is as important as your genetic code. So suppose you have in your genes, you may have that, okay, there is a propensity for having cancer.
Right.
Because your ancestors, someone in your lineage, from the lineage from which you have come, is exposed to cancer. Now that gets into your genetic code, right?
Right.
But whether it will get activated or not depends on epigenetics.
Oh, now I've got
So
it.
what is the
Thank
stress that you are subjected to? What is the environment you are subjected to? What are the people you are associating with, right? So again, when we look at power versus force, what did we say? That today, anything that you are exposed to will have an influence on the level of consciousness that you're operating at. So what is the gene that is going to get activated is also connected with the level of consciousness that you're operating at, right? So what is your environment? What are you thinking? What are you doing? What are you exposing yourself to will have a result in whatever you are experiencing in your life. And the genetic code is what which gets activated for you to experience something, right? So it's all interrelated.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now I've got it. Thank you.
Many times one can see how a younger child sits back and nestles into the lap of the mother.
Okay, so this is the chakra. So you can see there's a protective film around the adult's chakra. Over here, there is no protective film. The film is just getting formed. It's not yet there. So the chakra of the child is immature, right? And it can get influenced by anything.
So many times one can see how a younger child sits back and nestles in the lap of the mother or father. The child is being protected from outside influences by the field of the parent. Because of this vulnerability in the child, I am very conservative about allowing children to be in therapy groups with adults.
So very clearly, right? The child is a product of the mother and father. So the child is already in resonance with the field of the mother and father. So the child feels most comfortable in the field of the mother and father. Now, the field of the mother and father can also protect the child from outside influences because they care about the child, right? The field of the mother and father become a protective shield. And naturally, because the child is vulnerable, if the child is exposed to other adults who are having traumatic situations, the child will automatically get affected. That's why it's better not to expose children to traumatic situations very early in life. This was also the reason why children were not taken to the burning ghats, at least in the Hindu culture. Young children were never taken to the burning ghat, right? Because they could get influenced by the sights that they were seeing.
The adult has no idea what it feels like to the child unless he has regressed to that state of vulnerability. I have seen parents unwittingly subject their children to unneeded psychic shock by having them experience group therapy. thinking it to be a progressive thing or succumbing to group pressures. Adult rage shocks the child's system like physical shock, while grief and depression swamp it like a fog.
So like we were reading in Power versus Force, right? What is the level of consciousness that you're operating from? If you're operating at these lower levels of consciousness, they will totally encumber, it will totally create a problem for how you are living life, right? You'll never be happy when you're living in those states. Now, if the child is exposed to those vibrations, it's exposed to those fields, the child gets imprinted with those fields and then carries them through their life. That is why it's very important, right? What is the child being subjected to? You'll find that many children who are children of alcoholics or drug addicts, they have lots of problems in their life because in the formative years, that pain, that grief, that depression has been impressed, it's been painted onto the field of the child.
In addition to the physical nourishment, breastfeeding gives etheric energy to the child. There is a small chakra in each nipple which supplies the baby with energy. Remember, the baby's chakras are not developed and so do not metabolize all the energies from the universal energy field needed to sustain life.
So that this is the reason why breastfeeding is so important. Number one, the child is in the field of the mother where the child is most comfortable, right? The mother's milk will always nourish the child with all the nutrients that the child needs, because the mother, there is an instinctive love and care for the child by the mother. And also, of course, as mentioned here, the etheric energy from the universal field. So the mother acts like a step-down transformer for transmuting the universal energy that is around the mother and the baby, and stepping it down so that the child can absorb the universal energy through the mother's system. So this is very much like the circuit boards that we have in our houses, where the 440 line comes, it comes into a changeover switch, then it comes into a step down transformer. Then again, there's a changeover switch. Then there's a main changeover switch in your, before it comes into your apartment. Then you have the DB boxes in your apartment. Then you have the switchboards in your rooms, right? So everywhere the electrical circuitry is getting stepped down, and then it comes to the light when it lights up. So like that, the mother acts like a step-down transformer of the universal energy with which we are technically all connected to, so that the baby's system can absorb that energy and be all right with it, because it cannot absorb the full force of the universal energy.
Early childhood. As the child grows and the second chakra begins to develop, the child's emotional life becomes enriched. The child weaves fantasy worlds in which to live. She begins to feel like a separate person from the mother, and these worlds help create that separation. Within these fantasy worlds are the child's possessions. She will send amoeba-like projections from her etheric field out and around these objects.
So now, when we look at it from the perspective of the magical child, what we read, the first matrix was the mother's womb. The second matrix was the mother, right? So the child is still connected with the mother, but now it is moving into the next matrix where it is stepping out. So it's making connections with physical objects which are beyond the field of the mother. So the child is connecting to those objects. Like, so many times we will see in movies and also with our own children that they'll connect with a particular blanket, or they'll connect with a particular stuffed toy, which they want with them when they are sleeping. So they are making those etheric connections, and projections from the child go on to everything that it is connecting to. That is where possessiveness starts to come into the field.
The more important the object in building the fantasy world, the more energy consciousness from her field with which she will surround it. The object becomes part of the self. When this object is grabbed forcefully from the hand of a child, it tears the field and causes pain, both physical and emotional, to the child.
So again, the child is making these projectiles so that that object becomes a part of the field of the child, right? Now, if you're taking that thing away from the child forcefully, it's like taking apart, it's like tearing the hand of the child away. That's how the child will perceive it. So that's why we have to be very careful again as to how we are taking things away from a child. It has to be done in a very gentle and a caring manner, or we need to substitute it with something else. Yes, Rita ji?
Bhaiya, I wanted to ask you that even sometimes children tend to suck their own thumbs or the toe, even when they're very, very little, they'll pull up their legs and hold on to the toe of the legs, thumb, and they put the thumbs in their mouth. Is that part of this being attached?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is also part.
It's a part of the making the connection. It's a part of, and also see, suckling is a very, very natural process that a child does, right?
Yeah.
Because sucking the mother's breast for milk is a very natural instinct which is there. Now, every time the child cannot, many times when the mother is not available, the child will substitute with something else. So some children will suck their thumb, some children will suck the toes. Some people may suck a sheet also. You'll see many children, they will, the sheet that they are using to sleep, they'll put it in their mouth and keep sucking it.
Yeah, and as you said, Bhaiya, that it should be very gently, they should be gently taken away. But we always tend to, put the thumb away or tie the thumb up or something or the other.
Yeah, but then do it in a gentle way, not in an aggressive way.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the basic point.
Thank you.
My mommy, etc.
Simangla, we have to start again.
Beginning around the age of 2, the child sees his parents as belonging to him. Me, my daddy, my mommy, etc. The colors red, orange, and rosy pink become more visible in the aura. The child is learning to relate to another, learning a basic kind of love. In terms of the field, the child is able to separate from the field of the mother with an etheric umbilicus still connecting the two.
So what does this mean, right? Now, again, looking at it from the matrix system of magical child, the child will start to step away from the mother. But the child is constantly looking back at the mother to see if the mother is still there or not, or the father is still there or not, because it has not yet totally separated from the field of the parents. And there is an umbilical cord which connects the child to the field of the mother, right? So this becomes very, very important here, right? The possessiveness, the child is totally connected with the parents. The child will be extremely possessive of the parents. If another child goes and sits on the lap of the mother or father, the child doesn't like it because, it's intruding into my space. This is something that we also find in biofield tuning. I've been finding whenever a sibling is born and the attention of the parents shifts to the sibling, the elder sibling has a little bit of a traumatic experience because attention has shifted, and it shows up in the field when we are doing biofield tuning.
Thus, the process of separation and independent identity begins. The child creates a fantasy space, lives in it, but still has mommy connected through the etheric umbilicus.
So again, at this time, the child starts seeing invisible playmates, right? Now, as far as the child is concerned, those playmates are very real. Okay. And at times when we are going into expanded states of consciousness, we find that those entities, etc., are actually real because they are there, they exist in that expanded state. So the child is able to perceive them. We were just seeing a movie in the gateway, Just Like Heaven. In that, there is a young child, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. This lady is in coma, and her spirit is roaming around and looking, and she's going to her own house, and etc. etc. The child actually notices and understands that the spirit of her aunt has come there, and she actually puts a cookie out for the aunt in the movie. So the children can actually perceive and create these fantasy worlds in which they start playing and existing. It creates a cocoon for them to be able to exist, right? And that fantasy world is also sparked by imagination. So it also affects the imaginative abilities of the child. So that's why we must never tell children, don't fantasize, because those fantasies ultimately, when they grow up, can become very powerful methods of manifestation.
She can still look back and see that mommy is not too far away. This space appears to clairvoyant vision as composed of energy mostly from the blue level or etheric level. It is a space in which the child prefers to play alone, or if a playmate is allowed in, the playmate is carefully watched so as not to allow too much disturbance of the space. At this stage, the child does not have a strong enough ego to maintain a real clarity between self and other.
So again, the boundaries are very vague, right? The child has not totally become comfortable in its own skin. It's still like a field, right? The field effect is still there, that everything is in the field, and the child doesn't like the field to be disturbed too much. So if, let's say, the parents are fighting and it causes a disturbance in the field, the child gets very badly affected.
She struggles to find her uniqueness and yet still feels very connected to all things. Personal objects become ways of defining individuation. The private energy space helps this definition. Thus, when another child comes to visit the room of a 5 to 7-year-old, the hostess struggles between wanting the communication with another and preserving the image of self. So she struggles to control personal objects that help define who she is and around which she has placed her own energy consciousness. The struggle here is to recognize and maintain self-individuation and still feel connection to a different individual.
So what is this implying? That today when another child comes into the field of another one child, then there is possessiveness with the objects, etc. Right? The child is very wary of what the other child is going to do. So that tentativeness starts coming in. If the newcomer child wants to grab a toy to play with, the first child who is in their own environment will try to grab it back. Why? Because it's getting a little deviated. So again, there's a clear balance needs to be created. And that's why adult supervision at times is very important.
At around the age of 7, the child begins to weave a lot of gold energy into the space. The space becomes freer, larger, less connected to mommy, and more open to visitors. Having a greater sense of self, the child now begins to see her similarities to other humans. She can now allow the other a greater self-expression within her private space. A visitor is allowed to create all manner of energy forms within her private space. This makes things more fun and lively and enhances fantasy life. Children go into the gang stage. One of the things that make this all possible is that by the age of about 7, all the chakras now have a protective screen over them that filters out many of the energetic influences from the field around her. The child feels safer because in her auric body, she really is.
Right. So, as mentioned before, at the age of 7, the barrier comes in front of the chakras, which allows more integrity in the auric field of the child. So the child starts becoming more comfortable. When gold and orange start coming into the field, the child automatically starts becoming more creative, more outgoing, more, allowing of people to come into the field. So the energetics start to change. From the red, it starts to change into the blue, which is allowing influences, and then changes to gold. So there's always a wavering between the red golden spectrum and the blue violet spectrum in the child's life.
Exercise to sense psychic spaces. Adults also infuse their space with their energy. These psychic spaces are safe nests for people in which to live and have their being. Try feeling out psychic spaces that people create.
So what does this mean, right? You will always find that you feel your comfort zone somewhere. Wherever you sit, you'll find that you'll be comfortable over there. You'll find that a person will always go and generally sit in the same spot. That's why when I go to people's houses, I'll always ask, where does everyone sit on the table? Where is the space where everyone sits, right? If I'm not going in for an energetic healing or a rectification of the space. If I'm going to do a rectification of the space, I will always tend to gravitate towards the space in which the boss of the house sits, because that becomes the most influential space in the space that we are going to be sitting in, right? So that becomes very important. Everyone creates their own space, their own space where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, and we can actually sense it.
You can learn a lot from these spaces, both about yourself and the owner of the space. Just begin to tune into the spaces that you regularly visit. Walk into your friend's room. How do you feel? Do you like it? Do you want to stay or do you want to leave?
So these are things that we are really focusing on and talking about in the Vastu and the Aura or energy field workshop that we conduct. How to make yourself more sensitive, how to rectify the field of an environment so that it becomes more comfortable to you, right? One of the key factors here is awareness, becoming aware of how you feel. What do you sense in that space? Are you feeling comfortable? Are you feeling disoriented? Are you feeling welcomed? Are you feeling rejected, right? These sensitivities and how you deal with them start becoming very important, because if you're not comfortable in a space, then automatically there is a stress created in your body system, and then that stress has adverse effects on your on the functioning of your body. So again, epigenetics start to play a part, right? So if we are aware of something, then we can put strategies to deal with it so that the adverse effect doesn't remain with us.
If you have children, go into each of their rooms. Feel the difference in the energy in each room. How does it match your child? What of him does it express? Is the color right for him, or is it a color that you have imposed upon his space? Think about it.
So again, this becomes important, right? Each color has its own frequency of vibration, and each color will have an influence on the person living in that environment. So we can actually test, and we do this again in the Aura and Energy Field program, where you can actually find ways of testing whether one color suits one person or not. Or even the size of the furniture placement, everything starts to have an effect.
Try it with different stores that you go into. I find it impossible to stay in some stores because of the energy emanating there.
So again, increasing our sensitivity to these fields becomes extremely important, right? For our own well-being. If you're buying something, you need to be able to sense the energetic effect that it's going to have on you, whether it's going to uplift you or deplete you. And this is a sensitivity which can be cultivated, and our body systems are extremely sensitive. If we pay attention to the signals that the body is sending us, all these things can be very easily sensed. And this is what we find when we are doing the rectifications in a house. How are we using things, etc.
Now do a little experiment with objects. In a small group of people, preferably people that you don't know a lot about, put their personal objects in the center and choose one that you are attracted to. Hold it in your hand. How does it feel? Heavy, warm, friendly, unfriendly, sad, happy, safe, dangerous, healthy, sick? Do you pick up any images? Give yourself time to tune into them. Check it out with the owner of the object. I bet you are right about some of the things you pick up. Practice and you will do it better next time.
So there's a science called psychometry, where a person picks up an object and can talk about the character, the nature, how the hulia, I mean the characteristics of every person who has used that particular piece of jewelry or furniture, etc., etc. So we always leave an imprint on everything that we are using, right? So like that, if a person's object is there, it allows you to tune into the person. What is happening with that person? What is the environment that person lives in? What are the aspirations of a person? Everything can be discerned by just touching an object that a person has been using. And this is real. When we start listening to our body system is so sensitive that it picks up all these nuances. And it's really fantastic. By looking at a person also, you can discern what is happening with the person, because you're connecting with the field of the person. So if a person is using an object, that will always have the imprint, the energetic imprint of that particular person. And using that, you can discern everything about a particular person. This was also a reason why many highly spiritual people didn't allow their photographs to be taken, because through a photograph, you can get everything about a person.
Latency. As the child grows into latency between 7 and puberty, the development of more mental faculties occurs along with the development of the third chakra. More of the mental color yellow is added to the aura at this time. Although this chakra is opening and mental energies and the child is in school, the mental energies are primarily used to enhance the fantasy life of the child. Here, deep teleological urges and connections to the long past development of humanity come into play. The child becomes the Indian chief, the princess, Wonder Woman. These are deep idealistic urges which reveal the soul's longing and most likely relate to the soul's world task. Within these archetypal forms are found the deep spiritual longings of the individual, the goals and aspirations as expressed by the qualities played out in the background, backyard, or the school playground. It is now that the first three centers, the physical, emotional, and mental centers of the earth plane, are working together to express the first phase of the soul's incarnation.
So what games does a child play? What is the child attracted to, right? Will automatically indicate what is the propensity of the child. What is the child aiming towards? So that's why observing children also becomes very important on the part of the parents, to see exactly what is stimulating the child, what is the child being attracted to. So like, in fact, like the Dalai Lama, how the Dalai Lama is selected is that the old Dalai Lama's stuff is laid out along with other people's stuff. And then they observe what is the child attracted to. That is how the Dalai Lama is actually selected. If the child selects all the objects that were used by the previous Dalai Lama, who they feel that the soul of that old Dalai Lama has come into the new child, then that is how they select the child. So again, the propensity, the attraction to a particular object will automatically determine what your characters, what your nature is.
Adolescence. The challenge of adolescence, as in all the stages of growth, is to find the self and remain true to the self throughout all the chaos of physical and emotional changes, sweet longings, and painful rejections.
So the ultimate aim is to connect with ourselves, becoming true to ourselves, knowing who we are, right? And then playing out the game that we have actually prepared for ourselves. What have we decided to come here? That becomes the most important challenge. That is the most important thing that we actually have to focus in our lives.
As the child approaches puberty, large changes start occurring all through the body and the surrounding energy field. More green is added to the aura and the individual's private space. The space becomes infused with vibes from friends. As the heart chakra opens to new levels of feelings and the dawning of eros and love emerge from deep within the psyche, the beautiful color of rose fill the field. The pituitary third eye chakra is activated and the body begins to mature to that of an adult.
So again, green always, what I have seen when we take auras with the Progen camera, green always signifies change. It signifies growth. It signifies shifting of energies, right? So naturally, when a child is growing into adolescence, a lot of changes are taking place, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. And then when the heart chakra opens up, you're making deep connections with the other sex, or for people who you partner with. You're making deep friendships, right? You're expanding your worldview. You're expanding your circle. You're moving out of the field of your parents, right? So you're including more people into your circle, into your energy field.
All the chakras are affected by these changes. These new higher vibrations are sometimes embraced with excitement by the individual and at other times are loathed because they bring with them new longing and new vulnerability that the individual has not yet experienced.
So again, moving from the known to the unknown. This is a time when expansion is taking place. So you're naturally going to be touching base with many things which are unknown. And that can become traumatic for some people. Some people will revel in, some people it can become traumatic. That's why again, parents hand holding at this time of the growth period of a child again becomes very important.
At times, the entire field will be disrupted and the chakras will be completely out of balance, while at other times, everything will be flowing in harmony. Thus, the individual goes through great changes of emotional reality, and his actions express this confusion. At one moment, he is a child, at another, an adult.
So again, there's a mixing, right? Where we are moving back into the known and then going to the unknown, moving back to the known and moving back to the unknown. So the child doesn't really know whether the child is a child or becoming an adult. So this yo-yoing, okay, can become a pretty stressful time also in the growth period of a child, right? Lots of new stimulus, new feelings, new emotions, new activities starting to come into the system of the child.
The individual now repeats all the stages of growth that he has experienced, but with a difference. The first three stages involve the self as the center of the universe. It was me, my daddy, my mommy, my friends, etc. Now it is an I-thou relationship. The I does not exist alone, and the I now depends on proper adjustments to the not I.
So this is a very clear indication, right? You're stepping from the known to the unknown. Now, the not I is something that you have not related with previously. Now you have to integrate the not I's into your field, which can become very traumatic or can become very joyous also. It can have a double whammy away.
This is partially caused by the fact that the individual no longer owns the love object as he did in the case of his parents or toys. Now his welfare depends on a balancing of his actions to convince the loved one to love him, or so he believes. This puts a strain on the psyche between who he thinks he is and who he thinks he ought to be, according to what he thinks she wants him to be, and vice versa. Of course, this was already going on with the parents, but it is brought to the surface more now because at any moment the loved one may choose another, and often does publicly.
So again, with your parents, there is a kind of a security, right? You're always attempting to prove yourself to your parents. But your parents also care for you and love you, right? But it is not so with someone who is the not I. So you always have to be balancing. You always have to be tentative. You always have to keep trying new things or behaving in a particular way so that the not I agrees to be in your field, because the not I can leave at any time. So again, this is the stress of adolescence, right? Of the first loves, the puppy loves, etc. If a child, this can also cause a big trauma for people when the not I's leave their system without adequate closure, right? And this is again something that we find happening in the biofield also, where we pick up where a person has had a breakup, a person has had a divorce. All these things show up in the aura.
Adulthood. By the end of adolescence, the chakras and energy pattern used by the individual are now set. All chakras are on an adult form. It is at this individual may try to settle down and have no more changes. Some are able to accomplish this and with it cause their lives to stagnate into safe set patterns of clearly defined and limited reality. Most people, sufficiently shaken by their life experiences, see that a reality is not so easily definable and continue a lifelong search for meaning that leads them through constant challenge to deeper experiences of fulfillment.
So again, some people settle down to a routine life. They will keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie The Groundhog Day. It's a perfect example of this, where we get into a pattern and we get stuck in a pattern. Now, if we want to actually have a fulfilling life, we need to do new things. We need to learn. We need to grow. Because if we stagnate, we are finished, right? There is no growth and we'll be stuck throughout our lives. So more fulfillment, more growth will only come when we attempt to do new things. And that again, at this point in time becomes very important, attempting to do new things.
In maturity, the I Thou expands to include the personal family, which creates its own energy form. More energies flowing through the throat chakra help this personal giving and receiving. As time goes on, the I Thou can expand to include the individual and the group. The heart can open to include not only love of the mate and children, but also love of humanity. The color is seen in the aura as a beautiful lilac. This becomes then the integration of the self, the other, and the group consciousness. As the third eye opens to higher vibrations, one begins to see the unity of all things and can see at the same time the unique preciousness of each individual soul within that unity.
So, so this is the time of expanding the field, right? As you, again, we have seen this in power versus force in the levels of consciousness. As you expand or grow in your levels of consciousness, automatically your field of influence will also start to increase. Who are you connecting with? Who are you making a bond with, right? Who are you concerned with? So it starts with only the mother and the child, the father, mother, and the child. Then you expand to let some other people, friends enter into the field. Then you get into making connections with a deeper connection with a certain person. Then that I thou becomes your family, right? Again, your mother, father, maybe even if the father and mother are gone, your wife, your children, right? Then you start expanding the field where it starts including maybe your colleagues, maybe the people in your village, the people in your community. That expansion, as you go in levels of consciousness up, your field also of influence, the field that you care for, starts to automatically increase. And when we get into the higher vibratory frequencies, then we connect, we understand that everyone is unique and everyone is one. We start going into those states of consciousness.
Maturity. As the individual approaches old age and death, even more higher vibration rates can be added to the energy bodies. People's hair turns bright white as the white light coursing through their being increases their affinity with the spirit world. Now, to the I thou relationship is added a very deep personal relationship with God.
So now what is happening? The expansion of consciousness is taking place. But this doesn't happen with everyone. A person who has stagnated in that regular routine naturally will not come into this stage, right? So when we are looking at in the Gateway Voyage, Robert Monroe talks about innocence, and then about maturity, and then about wisdom, and then about freedom, right? So what are we talking over here? Now we are becoming mature. So we are starting to understand what is an illusion and what is not an illusion, right? We are making our deeper connection with God because we start to understand that most of what we are experiencing in this normal mundane world is an illusion. It's Maya, right? And that's when we start making that higher spiritual connection. Now, of course, everyone doesn't come into maturity. Okay, many people get stuck in adolescence. Many people get stuck as a child, right? So again, we have to also see our levels of consciousness, how we are actually maturing.
The lower earthly energy metabolized through the lower chakras decreases and is steadily replaced by higher, finer energies, having much more to do with spirit than life on the physical plane. The person is preparing to return home to the spirit world. When these natural processes are understood and allowed to unfold from within the psyche, serenity and love fill the personal life of the individual.
So again, an understanding that we are here temporarily, that we are beings which were operating at very highly expanded states of consciousness, have reduced our state of consciousness to experience this earth life experience. The moment we start understanding that deeper connection, the roadway back into that expanded states starts to manifest. And in my view, the Monroe process allows us to experience this in a very gentle and in a very beautiful way, right? So that we can understand that, okay, what is our pathway when we are moving away from here? And when you start using that properly, then that connection with that deeper state of consciousness, the higher states of consciousness, with godly love, etc., that expansion starts to take place very, very beautifully.
Things fall into place from all the growth that has taken place throughout the years. The solar plexus especially becomes more harmonious. The person is able to increase his depth of perception that makes life, despite diminishing physical power, a thing of ever growing interest and richer experience.
So this was the reason why old people in olden tribes were consulted all the time because they had wisdom, right? They had experienced life. Of course, nowadays, the children think that they know more than everyone else. But in older days, the wisdom of the elders was really respected. This is because of this, right? That there's an increase in the depth of perception. The way that the elders are perceiving something becomes very different from the way that an adolescent child would perceive it. Having said that, now even elders still want to remain youngsters. So again, there's a double whammy over here. The youngsters want to become the boss and become the elders, and the elders want to still remain as youngsters. So again, there's a dichotomy, right? The actual aspect of this was a beautiful thing of the joint family system, where the grandparents actually lent a big hand in bringing up the children. Right nowadays, because of nuclear families, again it is collapsing. So it becomes a big problem. But of course, the elders had rich experience and people used to consult them previously. Now, of course, it's not happening much.
It is unfortunate that our culture in general does not respect and utilize this great resource of wisdom and light, as do other cultures like that of the Native American Indians, in which the grandmothers and grandfathers retain the power of decision for the community.
So again, what does this imply? Previously, authority used to flow from the top down. Now authority is flowing from the bottom up. So what is the wisdom that a child has as to what are the experiences that the family must experience, right? The older people, the grandmothers and grandfathers, the great grandparents had more wisdom. They had seen life, right? So we must listen to them, not to the children. But unfortunately, in our systems nowadays, the youngest in the family is becoming the boss. That guy dictates where we are going to do, what are we going to do, right? So naturally, it creates disharmony going forward.
Death. According to Phoebe Bendit, at death, a luminous ray flashes out the top of the head as the person leaves the earth plane through the crown chakra.
Okay, so now over here she's saying leaving through the crown chakra, right? This was also the reason why we had the Kapal Kriya in the Hindu process, where when a body is in the funeral pyre, you do a Kapal Kriya, you break the skull, right? But according to the Hindu system, there are 10 places where you can leave from, right? There are 10 openings in our body system. You have the urinary tract, you have the anal tract, you have the mouth, you have the two nostrils, you have the two eyes, the two ears, and from the top of the head. The highest level of exit in the Hindu system is from the head, which is what they are talking about over here.
This experience of going out the crown has often been described as going through the tunnel between life and death. It is seen as a long, dark tunnel with a bright light at the end. This tunnel experience can also be said to be the soul going up through the main power current of the body along the spine and leaving at the bright light of the crown chakra.
So again, every time there's a tunnel, right? When we are going into these expanded states in the Monroe processes, also the Monroe programs, many people experience these tunnels. Many people who have had near-death experiences also talk about the tunnel experience, right? So I think we can stop here today. We'll repeat this tomorrow because I think there'll be a lot to talk about over here. So I think we'll stop here. It's already 1 o'clock.